Hey everybody, I'm Francesca Maxime and this is Wise Girl. It's Sunday, January 28th, a rainy, wet day, but a warm day in New York. I can feel spring coming. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that has sort of been in the news in many ways, and also something that I think is very applicable to everybody's life, really, everyone's lives. And that is this concept of our secrets, things we don't say, things we don't share, things we don't acknowledge, even things that we may be at a certain level unaware of. And there's a saying out there that says, we're only as sick as our secrets. We're only as sick as our secrets. You know, seeing all of that coverage, which was tremendous in terms of the courage that it took for so many of these young girls and young women to come forward and speak against USA gymnast Dr. Larry Nassar inappropriately assaulting them over the course of many, many years, and the consequential, repercussions for their emotional well-being and physical well-being and mental well-being. And then, of course, the other pieces of it, the cover-up, the other people who were involved, the hierarchical structures that keep such a deep-seated crime hidden for so long. Why do we have such a resistance to sharing secrets or to acknowledging that which is somehow something that we feel is shameful or could threaten our safety or the structure in which we're a part if we do in fact tell? And what's at stake, what's at risk, not only for the external part, right? So it could be a marriage or a family or an institution, it could be a job, it could be a role in a movie, as we saw with a lot of these Hollywood actresses that were sexually assaulted and harassed. That idea of not telling or telling, and what's at stake, what's at risk, what's the cost. So one of the things that I want to share is that oftentimes we're not aware of that which is operative in terms of why we react the way that we do to certain situations, what triggers us. For example, if we had a father who was abusive and was sexually inappropriate when we were young, he had a certain kind of gait when he would walk down the hallway, and you could tell when his feet were coming into the room at a certain type of night, at a certain time of night, and you heard a similar gait in your adult life, prior to his abusing you, and you heard a similar gait, down the hall in a totally unrelated circumstance, that may provoke a certain kind of fear in you of this person that you have no connection to, who's going to enter the room and talk to you about, say, a work presentation or something, that very much is stored in your body's memory, but has nothing to do with the present situation at hand, right? But it's very real for you, because as it should be, or as it naturally would be, because your body was traumatized and you were traumatized by that repetitive developmental trauma that you had as a kid. So when you hear that sound, it provokes a certain reaction in you. But a lot of people don't know how to deal with that when it comes up. And so they feel terrorized, they feel traumatized, they feel, rightly so, that there's something off with the situation, but they don't really have a name for it, because maybe they haven't done a full investigation into what really happened when they were kids. Maybe they've disassociated and blacked it out, don't have words to put with it, have tried to move on with their lives, as many people do, And then at a certain point, something may crack, something may break open, something may actually just say, oh my God, I can't keep going with this anymore. A dream may come up, a sense of, like the scenario I just described, where somebody's coming, in for something entirely unrelated, and, you have a panic attack at work and you can't function. Something may end up shifting the perspective from why is this happening to what is really happening internally to me, and is there something here that I need to inquire about? Is there something here that I need to explore? Oftentimes people are afraid to explore these things independent of any trauma trigger in present day, because you want it to just go away and you want it to not be there, but sometimes it lingers and lingers and lingers, because that's the way that the body holds memories of experience. So in that case, you have to find a way to be in a safe environment where you are able to speak with someone who is trained in trauma work, and in this case, perhaps specifically in childhood sexual abuse work, family child sexual abuse work, and start talking to them about it, in addition to possibly doing somatic therapies, which work with the body to try and reestablish what the nervous system would consider to be a safe space, right? Instead of being hypervigilant and overtaxed and always on alert, as it would be if you heard that voice or heard those, feet coming down the hall, you were sort of on alert. Your signal cry is ready to go off at any time, because you're trying to prevent whatever happened in your childhood from happening again. You're trying to make sure that, you protect yourself, because this is what you need to do, and you couldn't then, so you're really wanting to try and make sure that that doesn't happen, but it almost is contractive in that way. So you kind of are putting an old story on a new situation sometimes, right? And that can blow up how you can live fully and freely today, can force someone to be in a more contracted state than one needs to be. So if one learns to get more regulated, which is a physiological thing, your nervous system, if you learn how to understand what your body tells you in terms of sensations and in terms of contractions and, what fear feels like in the body as opposed to what you think and conceptualize it to be. What does it feel like in your belly to have a real sort of anticipation and anxiety over something, as opposed to, oh, I'm anxious about this, or I'm an anxious person about this. What does it feel like in the body? Those are all the kinds of therapeutic methods that once one opens up to a secret, conscious or unconscious, known or unknown, that can be helpful in terms of shifting someone from just surviving to ultimately opening up and thriving more in life. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is a trauma therapist in Massachusetts who does amazing work on this. His book is called The Body Keeps the Score. And also Pat Ogden of Sensory Motor Psychotherapy does great work in this regard, as does Dr. Peter Levine's work, which is somatic experiencing trauma therapy, which is what I'm training in. But I say all of this because going back to this concept of secrets, and we're only as sick as our secrets, when we do start to realize what it is that's going on, and we think we're the only one, or we think that we're, perhaps crazy, or we think that we need to be quiet, or we think that something's off, but we can't quite put our finger on it, or we don't really know the words to use to express what it is that makes us feel unsafe, which is a real feeling that needs to be honored. There's something that makes you feel unsafe. You need to pay attention to that, whatever it is. And we sort of go off on this story of, well, what's at stake? I don't if I told my mom about what was going on with my father, then she would be mad at me, or he might abandon me, but he's nice to me in this situation, so why does he do this? And, you're a kid trying to make sense of all of that. So you keep the secret. You don't want to be abandoned by your parents. You require their care and assistance. So in a case of childhood sexual trauma, oftentimes you wouldn't say anything. And then you might have resentment toward the parent who was the non-offending parent that you might see as an enabler, who isn't there to protect you and stand up for you. So there's a whole host of repercussions for what it means when we hold on to our secrets in adult life. Because as a kid, oftentimes, it's understandable that our main priority is to survive. And so we do what we need to do in order to survive. And oftentimes that means not saying explicitly whatever it is that's happening, which is why, going back to the beginning of the conversation, it's so brave of so many of these people to have come forward and talked about what was happening to them. So brave. And I sincerely hope that they continue to get the sustained therapeutic treatment and compassionate care that will not only help them heal, but have a sustained sense of well-being and another opportunity at a full experience at life that was truncated necessarily when their innocence was lost in such a violent and horrible way. So how do we work with secrets? Who do we tell if we don't know anybody to talk to, if we don't have any grounding for what would make for a good outlet? Some people don't tell anyone. Some people write it out. Some people do have a chance to go to therapy. Some people tell people who may not be the right person, meaning a trustworthy enough person, that a person doesn't believe them. That person negates their story or questions it. Some people confront their abuser, although that's, I don't think, often the case because there's so much at stake. And the majority, I think, of people suffer silently. And that is what ends up creating what I would call a epidemic of silence and secrecy around family childhood sexual abuse. You hear about it from time to time in the news. And if you look at the recent reports of Woody Allen, and Dylan Farrow, and that particular scenario, that's a scenario of incest. I mean, that's what it would be called. It's not really being called that in the news, and I don't know why. Maybe because he's a famous Hollywood person. But all those charges that are alleged and all of those findings that had been conclusive, to be honest, but not prosecuted, they amount to incest. So, why am I talking about this? Because I'm trying to get the conversation started. I wrote about it in a Medium post about a week and a half ago. I shared some of my own personal experiences around the issue. And I also talked about how it relates to the whole Me Too thing, in the sense that if roughly 20% of people who are, girls have been molested by family members, and I'd say about, 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 that we know of, although both of these numbers are likely much higher, of boys have been molested by family members or caregivers, then this is something that people aren't talking about because they don't know how to. They feel uncomfortable at it. They don't know what to do or say. And oftentimes the victims as children just don't have the words to, explain it, right? There's no way to explain it. So what does a parent or a concerned adult need to do in order to be receptive to hearing that someone who is willing to be brave enough to share their secret, what do they need to be able to hold about that? What are the reasons why oftentimes it's not talked about. Well, oftentimes there's a lot at stake. Societally, there's a lot at stake. Like I said, the family disintegration. There might be some kind of, disbelief and push away from other people that think people are using it as an attention getter or whatever level of excuses. That doesn't happen. Okay, the vast majority, I mean, there might be one or two cases where people are not being truthful about situations that happen, but nobody wants to create those kind of stories when they're not true. Nobody really wants that. It's too painful. So, writing about your secrets can often be a really important way to get them out of your body so that they're not stuck in it and like a cancer eating away at your ability to live with more freedom. Talking to someone who's trusted is a little bit more tricky because sometimes if you talk to the wrong person, they may encourage you to just keep silent. So there are hotlines and there are different groups out there that are very helpful. And RaiNN is one of them, RaiNN. You can look it up and Google it. And they'll be able to guide you through a process of proper reporting, and you can figure out what might be wise to do. But the impact of holding on to secrets that need to be processed. I'm not saying everything needs to be made public. Not every case is that way, although many are. The impact of someone who needs to share secrets in some way, shape, or form and doesn't is devastating on the person who holds them. Physically, psychologically, emotionally. Because oftentimes there's some story attached to it that's not true, which is I did something wrong, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm tainted, or I was the creator or cause of some of this, or whatever. And it's really important to just be able to take a step back and say, no, I'm not going to continue to take this on. I'm going to give this up and turn it over to somebody who, is more skilled at processing some of this trauma and go forward. So I just want to sort of name that and say, listen, there's a whole epidemic of family childhood sexual abuse as well as institutional abuses like the one that we saw with USA Gymnastics or the Catholic Church or the Boy Scouts or you name it. So I would just highly recommend that just know that you're not alone. Try and see if there's any way that you can get some support, perhaps. And it's awful that it's incumbent on the person who's suffering to do this, but it has a lot to do with, I think, why abusers continue to proliferate. Oftentimes they are people who've been abused when they've been kids, and not excusing it. We don't excuse behavior, but understanding it, I think, is also important because when we don't have boundaries around what it is that's okay with us, we're more prone to set ourselves up to be in a situation where we get retargeted in adult life if we hold on to our secrets without looking at them and end up in abusive situations that are not helpful, whether they're in the workplace, whether they're overt like sexual assault, or whether or not they're just sort of more subliminal where we don't ask for what we need and we don't get the pay raise and we don't get the promotion or whatever it is. There's a lot of repercussions. So reclaiming your own vitality and dignity and place on the planet is really important. And there are ways to work with this. Trauma therapeutic ways, like I said, you could read some of those books that I mentioned by Pat Ogden, Ogden, Bessel van der Kolk, Kolk, van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, or even Peter Levine, who works with folks in the somatic experiencing model. And you can find people, if you're fortunate, that work on those kind of trauma therapies. So that's all I'm going to say for now, a long wise girl today, but I think it's important to be in touch with some of what it is that may be eating us inside and get it out in some way, shape, or form so we can start to move beyond it. And also encourage people to, to call RAINN, RAINN, if they feel as though there's something not quite right and they don't know how to address the situation, but they want to start talking to someone. There's a hotline there that's confidential, and they will talk to you. All right, talk to you later.